Neil could try to keep me honest. All right, so I will call to order the September 11th meeting of the Budget Committee. So called. And can I get someone to volunteer to do the Pledge of Allegiance? Anyone want to volunteer? Okay, Charlie's gonna volunteer. All right.
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hopkintonta@gmail.com.
All right, so the first order of business is to approve the meeting minutes from the May 15th meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. A second. Okay, thank you, Vicky. Debbie, all right. You want to start down here? Vicky?
Aye.
I wish a roll call if you don't want to,
Okay.
because nobody's online.
Perfect, great, that's great news.
We all speak at the same time.
You jumped over discussion.
Thank
And
you.
I just wanted to, there's a blank in the approval of the meeting minutes of April 10, 2024. Was a motion to approve. Mr. XXX made a motion to approve. So I think that probably was me.
Okay,
So that was the only addition I wanted to make.
okay, so the meeting minutes need to be updated to fill the X in with Ken.
What page was it on?
On first page. Under
I'll have to-
approval of public meeting minutes of April 10.
Do we need a motion to make the edit or to approve
I
with
think it was
the
just
edit?
left blank, so
Okay.
it's now corrected.
All right. Any more discussion on the meeting minutes?
We often call Ken Mr. X.
Yeah. Very mysterious.
Yeah.
All those people online heard you.
Okay, any other discussion on the meeting minutes? No? Hearing none, can I get you to make a motion again to approve, Charlie?
I'll move to approve the minutes as corrected.
Thank you. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Minutes are approved. Okay, so we added an agenda item to discuss relevant inflation indices. Following the meeting, which I myself refreshed my memory on in May, where there was substantial discussion. And I will paraphrase the meeting minutes themselves, so I will try not to mischaracterize what came out of that meeting, but if anyone has a different memory, feel free to jump in. More or less, the committee, I think, decided did not take a vote on, but leaned in the direction of not putting a official target on the budgets or tying any budgets to a specific inflation index, but rather discussing which indices may be appropriate to think about in the context of the municipal and school budgets. And so there was an action item to do a little bit of homework on what those indices might be and what they have been historically. And sort of, at least now speaking for myself, my way of thinking about this is that it is a piece of education that we could all have to think about as we evaluate the budgets and their increases. But again, if we wanted to revisit whether we wanted to provide like actual guidance as a target, that I think we'd have to discuss more. But that is what we discussed in May as a refresher. If you were here as acting chair, is that correct? Okay. So with that, Rob and Mark, did some further digging. And do you want to discuss it?
I can talk through
Okay.
what's on
Great.
here. So, Neil, if you're able to share your screen and then go to the 5-year indice tab on the bottom there.
You want me to pass this out?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
please pass that out. It's kind of small font, but I'm gonna give you a hard copy, also small font, sorry, but that's what it took to get it on one page.
Thank you.
So I think like the way that I left that meeting, in addition, as a good summary, Krista, is there's no one perfect index, right? And so different indices have different, they're derived in different ways and they have different utility. So looking at some things that I come up with, some of Rob's ideas about what he thought were some relatively useful indices. There are 4 that are listed here, and what you've got here is like a summary tab that shows the last 10 years of data on each of those indices, as well as the Hopkinton municipal tax rate, school rate, and the total rate, except for 2024, because it's a little complicated because the rate A hasn't been finalized and B is going to dramatically change because of this, the reval. So forget 2024 for a minute. But just to step through these, I think most people know what the CPI is, Consumer Price Index. And, that is generally thought of as like one index of a commonly referenced index of inflation. It's a whole basket of stuff in there. And it's, so this is me. I'm not an economist. Right. I think of it as like a general look at how's inflation hitting a typical household. All right. And it's not perfect. So there are ways to massage the CPI to include or exclude certain factors and target it more. I didn't do that. This just shows the CPI. The personal consumption index or expenditure index is one that I think a lot of economists think is a little more useful than the CPI. I think it's what the Fed actually looks at quite a bit. And because it's particularly focused on, as it says, personal consumption and consumer goods. And I guess has some weighting that well, what this says is relative weights in the CPI are based primarily on household surveys, while relative weights in the PCE are based on business surveys. So you can take that for what it is. You can see CPI and PCE are often close, but not always. In 2021, the personal consumption expenditure index was 6.2, and the CPI was only 4.7. Then they flipped the following year, where CPI was 8% and the PCE was 5.4. But they're often, within a few tenths away from each other, within 0.5% away. And then the two that Rob brought forward, which I think are helpful, the municipal cost index really looks at like expenditures that municipalities face.
I think just to correct that one, I think I brought that one forward. So I just don't want to put that on Rob. Yeah, Rob brought forward the ECI.
Okay, thank you.
And then he also brought forward PC healthcare, which I don't think that we
Haven't put that on.
haven't put that one in. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so municipal cost index, it's maintained by, this entity that serves municipalities, and captures, I think, sounds like some of the common things that, that reflect cost of doing business as a municipality.
When
And
you say municipality, that includes schools in this indices?
No,
I think so.
that one is put together by the American City and County Magazine. And it as far as I recall, it does not include schools.
Okay.
And then the last one that Rob suggested was the employment cost index. And that one's particularly, gets at labor costs. And since labor costs, especially when you look at school budget, it's probably true for town too, but really particularly for school is such a high proportion of the overall budget. And the ECI you can parse out by different sectors. So there is a school specific analysis, which is what's shown here. So this is the employment cost index for the school labor force across the US. And so Rob felt like when you're looking at the school budget, this could be a particularly useful benchmark given the proportion of the school budget that's occupied by personnel and fringe benefit costs. I'm just going to stop. I think that's what we've got. That's what we put together, and they're all different. They all may have value, and they all may be worthwhile benchmarks as we consider budget proposals.
Just two questions or clarifications. One is, I know we debated a little bit last time of what the delta was between CPI and PCE on housing in particular. So just for folks' knowledge, that difference. So 42% of the CPI number, you see that in the chart in the minutes, is housing. And the way that's calculated is owner's equivalent rent. So I think that's part of the basis of why Rob was saying of all the indices here, that's probably the least useful, is because that's really a made up number and doesn't reflect the realities of like what an average household would have to spend in any given month, particularly when we're looking at a community that is largely made up of home owners. So of all the ones here, to me, that's the one people often have in their heads when they want to cite an index, but it's the least relevant to, I think, a budget setting exercise, is my view on it. And then a question is, it looks like we're looking at the change in time over the tax of the tax rate per thousand, but it's super lumpy because of the revaluations. Is there a way that we can maybe if you look at the total dollars of the budget divided by the school population, or sorry, I guess total town population, that to me is the relevant comparison to the like 3-year average, 5-year average, 10-year average. So
I had that same thought.
you're looking at dollars
Yeah.
per maybe household, not per population, per household.
I actually am not sure if you would have to do that math. Like, I think you might just be able to do the top level number and the change year over year. Like, do you need to get down to the per?
I think you
household?
do because those indices are per household or per individual. So if you want to compare apples to apples, it's got to be a per capita number.
Yeah.
Because our budget
that's
varies based on largely on the school age population, right? Those are numbers that'll go up and down based on that population.
Yeah, I think that is a valid point, and you can see it in 2019, which I had the same takeaway. And so that's probably math we can do and come back with. Otherwise, you're really looking at the 3-year average, which should not really have that. Like the 3-year average, even of the rates, should not be like that should be mostly relevant, I think, because you don't have the reval happening in the past 3 years.
Yeah,
It
I
wouldn't
think
be
it's
affected
cleaner.
by-
I think it's still cleaner to correct for the
Mhm.
population too. And maybe not, but not even the population, the school enrollment.
for the school budget, but for the town budget.
Yeah, but maybe that's just me, but because it's, 90%, I think you get most of the way there.
I really like that idea, and I definitely do not like the idea of not doing it on a town basis. We have such a dynamic in the town around blaming everything on as far as the tax rate on the schools, and I don't want to contribute to that by having different
fair enough.
approaches and evaluating
Fair
the
enough.
schools in the town. But we were just talking about this. I was just talking about this with Neil yesterday. The day
Yes, I
before.
think it was.
Yeah, about this issue of how do you sort of equalize, normalize because of the every 5-year reassessment. So, per capita or per household.
That's good. You could also use in addition, the equalized tax rate, which would show, which would be a more level type rate. So
What's the equalized?
each year, the sales are reviewed. And the sale price compared to the assessed value is compared and a ratio is developed, which is how towns are compared. For example, the county tax here is equalized. If you're in a school district that's multi-town, it's an equalized so that you're comparing apples to apples, because if somebody's reassessed one year and somebody else the next, those can be very different numbers. There's always a lag though. Like we won't know the 2024 equalization rate probably until January of 25. But the equalized rate should be the tax rate this year because we'll be at 0, but other years there is a lag.
Just for clarification, I can tell you what the percentage we were at before we had the reevaluation. So it was 50.
It was 60, I think it was 64.5.
Well, we could easily plug in the equalized tax rate through 2023 into this workbook, so people could look at it and see if it's useful, as well as the per capita.
I think the equalized tax rate gets there, right? Because that's the total budget essentially divided by the households, or the value of all the households.
Equalized is your actual tax rate divided by the equalization ratio, which is developed with sales versus assessed value. So
I'm just trying to make sure it's, because again, the CPI and PCE numbers are effectively per capita numbers. So put simply, like if the town's population was growing by 10% a year and the budget grows by 10% a year, the number we should be looking at is 0 compared to, if we're trying to compare it to CPI, if that makes sense. But if the budget is growing by 12% a year and the population only grew by 10% a year, then you're looking at that 2% number.
It's not necessarily population, it's like per household. Right? Because taxes are property taxes collected.
I
per
think so, yeah.
household.
I'm using those synonymously, but yeah.
It's not, I mean, it's really not, it's basically, I mean, the tax rate isn't per household, right? It's per $1,000 of the assessed value. So it's total budget divided by the total assessed value of property. And so it doesn't actually get you, I think, what you're talking about. It's just either per household or per capita.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to compare the two, but they're definitely not the same.
right, totally different.
So I don't want to overstep here, but what I think is I think we are zeroing in on the right indices. Like I personally think that the MCI, and by the way, I remembered that I should have said this. I did actually reach out to the municipal association, back whenever I did this a couple months ago. That's why I have brain fog. And that is the index that they recommended for me to think about for municipalities. So, and the employment cost index for schools. And then I think we can add in here also the PCE healthcare, which I think treats healthcare a little bit differently than the overall PC. But that's the one that Rob felt comfortable using for the school. I think it adds in healthcare costs is what it does. Um, and between those, I feel like we have a mix of indices that we can look at least for that like educational overview. And as a next step, probably cleaning up this spreadsheet, trying to get to that per household or per capita proxy number. My view is that the utility of this can then maybe live on as kind of a living document for us to refer to. I'm interested in thoughts of how outspoken we are when we communicate to the public about the budgets this year. Like, how does the budget committee want to think about how we communicate how we used these in approving the budgets? And I guess I'll leave it there for thoughts.
I think these have different purposes. Like, I think it's relevant for us to look at all of them from a budget setting perspective. But the PCE, for example, is helpful to know, how the cost burden of different households has changed from one year to the next. But it's less informative to say, is the budget reasonable relative to costs that are outside of our control or not? That's the MCI is more relevant to that question. So those are really two different questions. But I think both are helpful from an outside communications perspective to the town about, hey, these were inputs to the process. Like, here's our understanding of how household costs have changed. But this is really the index we look at to compare ourselves to what other municipalities are facing, if that makes sense.
What I'm seeing is that we have a bunch of different indices, and we average them out, and let's say it was 4% last year. And then we look at for the town, maybe what the percentage increase in population was, maybe it's another 1%. So that maybe we say, okay, in the range of 5% increase in the budget makes sense. For the schools, maybe we look at the change in student enrollment as a percentage, add that to the 4%, and that might be the range we should be looking at. I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of explaining things to the public, that to me seems easier. The one that I did not see here was the Social Security increase. And we've got a lot of citizens that, rely on Social Security, and how that should be also included here.
Yeah, I do remember we talked about that. Thanks for the reminder, Ken. I guess for me, I think I have come to the personal opinion that we probably don't want to be in the business of setting a target.
And I'm not suggesting
Yeah.
that. I'm the furthest from suggesting it.
Yeah. And so I'm cautious of how explicitly we communicate our approval of the budget against the indices in order to not create a misconception that we're providing targets. But also, we do want to create the conception, or that we do want to make voters, I think, feel confident that we've thought about these things. And so, go ahead.
I agree. Right along that line. My only thought that just came up is there are some things, and someone mentioned it, that are out of our control.
Right.
That have to be. And we have to spend money on,
Mhm.
especially our roads. Move forward with that, and the new schools.
Mhm. And Rob, I don't want to speak for him, but he brought up a very valid point that, like, special ed, going back to that, is something that could cause a fairly significant change in the budget. And if you compare against an indice which is mostly tracking salary and benefits increases, you could have an externality that you can't control that's making you not look comparable to the index. And I think it would be unwise there. That's like one of the reasons I think it would be unwise to take a target, because I think it would box us in on unhelpfully on these like factors outside of our control, but
My concern is that the indices might show such an increase,
mhm,
but it's not indicated on some of the expenses.
Mhm.
Just the one of them.
right.
I mean, just to clarify, we could do something about it, right? You would cut the budget into different part.
True.
I mean, I think. I also don't think we should be target setting, at least not right now. The thing about what's in our control or not is tricky, right? There are externalities that are outside of our control. And to your point, the total bottom line budget is in our control. It is in the control of the school board and the select board to come up with a total budget to put forward to this budget committee to either endorse or not. And that is in our control. I just want to come back to, like, I think you framed it really well, Charlie. I see the value of these as at trying to help us with two different, I'll speak for me, trying to help me think about two different questions. One is what the town or the school putting forward sort of reasonable? As in it's not way out of whack with, or especially over time, because you can't have a forward look. They're backward looking indexes, right? Not forward looking. But does it appear reasonable given the overall cost of doing business for that entity based on an index? And then the separate question is, do we think people can afford it, even if it's reasonable? And so the different indices help, I think, it will help me to think about those two different questions. And everyone might evaluate them a little differently, but like, so that's what I would want to communicate as a budget committee member. We use these to help us think about two different questions.
Your point on them being backward looking is important too. Like these would not actually be all that useful for setting a future budget target. It only tells you how you've done relative to the target previously. So as a communications tool, I think that's helpful on both of those fronts, Mark. If I'm doing the math here right, though, and I know we have to control for population as we were talking about, I think since 2015, this number looks pretty good relative to all of these indices. The average I get is 1.3 across those 9 years.
I'm sorry, what are you about?
I just took.
He did math that we didn't do.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
on this spreadsheet, yeah.
I just took the last line on there, the change year over year of the school plus the town rate, added those all together and divided by a 9, and you get 1.3.
Well, the reval is driving that. So it makes it look very different than reality.
But shouldn't that average out over that period?
So I think that's why we got to look. I think the equalized tax.
Yeah.
Do running that on equalized tax rate will give a much more accurate.
Yeah,
number.
okay.
So-
which we could do.
So I think those are the action items. Like if I should get myself a pen. We're adding in social security. That's a request.
Sure.
Thank you.
You could also use just the line instead of the actual tax rate, use the raised by taxes amount, which is the actual appropriation, which would give you an apples to apples comparison throughout the year. Because that doesn't, then the reval isn't affected, isn't part of those numbers.
That's what I thought, but Charlie's saying that doesn't get you a per cap or per household or per anything. That's just like the total millions of dollars that were raised by taxes.
It doesn't.
Right.
It would just give you the increase.
In value.
The tax
value.
Is it tax incremental households?
Right, you would have to add in you would have to figure in the household cost, but our number of households does not change dramatically year to
So-
year.
Yeah, I mean, still order of magnitude, like if you just ignore the revaluation and count that as a zero, even though it's a negative good guy number, the
Mhm.
average of those numbers is still 3.4, which compares pretty well to the 3-year and 5-year averages.
But that's kind of irrelevant to what people actually pay. Because even though the tax rate dropped those years, their values went up, so their tax bill didn't drop.
Fair.
So
Yep.
you're not really showing any impact that way.
Got it. Yeah.
That's why the amount raised by taxes would show you the impact of what taxpayers are paying.
Well, we can do both. We
Yeah,
can do amount
it's
raised
easy
by
to run.
taxes. Maybe if you divide that by the number of households
I think
at any
that's
given
it.
year, then that would
Yeah.
be probably the right math. And then we could add in an
Another-
equalized tax rate too, because why not while we're at it?
And dividing it by the number of households will account for a small amount of new houses built during the year.
Do we have the hard numbers on number of households?
Yes.
Great.
Well, I think I might argue for population over household.
Okay.
Because even though the household is the tax paying unit, the costs vary by population. Because the lion's share of the budget is the school enrollment, and the school enrollment is driven by population. And again, the numbers, the indices that we're comparing them to are per capita numbers, not per household numbers.
And you could argue that other municipal services like the wear and tear on the roads or the number of ambulance calls is more related to the number of people and not the number of houses.
Yep, like that.
Well, the beauty of Excel is it's super easy to. I think that to compare apples to apples with the indices, population is a smoother comparison.
I don't think it's gonna make that much of a difference, but it's just easier to defend that it's all consistent.
It'd also be helpful what the planning board is talking about, the multi-unit housing that they're talking about putting in. If everything could be related to population, then you could say, okay, you're gonna be adding another 100 people. How much would that cost on services over time?
That's a good point. So back to your point about a communication strategy, I think maybe we just talk about our holistic effort to, sort of reestablish our role as a budget committee, right? We had the municipal association come in, and Catherine gave her presentation. We're digging into a lot of different factors that affect the people who live in this town. Maybe we don't necessarily need to name employment cost index -schools. But I have to make a point that I made before, which is that these are relevant to some stakeholders, which is like, for instance, employment cost index schools are relevant to the people who are setting the budget and paying the people who work in the school. But for Joe Sixpack, who does not have kids in school or who doesn't work in the school, he's just looking at how his paycheck compares with his tax bill. He doesn't really care that nationwide it's more expensive to hire teachers because he's going to say, well, then do more with less, like the rest of us have to do.
That's why the PCE is on here, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But I'm just saying, if we're not going to necessarily share all this detail with them and more about why we're going through this process, it's, I would think, to try and help us examine the different viewpoints within the economy, including the boards and the constituents. And also your one sheet, Don, or your 2-pager, whatever it was that you brought out in the springtime and said, we used to do this every year. I think we should do it again. Do you remember that? It's another thing that we should include if we're going to describe our efforts, is that we're going to we're going to retool this excellent summary for the taxpayer.
I agree. So I think we did discuss that, just Dawn's 1-pager, and then we probably don't need to discuss it in this meeting. Maybe we can just put it on an agenda for next meeting, so as not to overburden this one, but, we had a discussion that I'm, again, a little brain foggy on how we want to best communicate this in terms of like format, and I think we talked through like, are there handouts? Is there a presentation? We said no presentation, probably because that's not really the right forum when the budgets are being presented, but that there's generally a handout at town and school meeting that we could provide, which is like 1 to 2 pages, the opinion of the budget committee, and probably it could include an overview. Does that ring a bell to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
We clearly were asked at town meeting to provide the total town impact. And
Mhm.
we certainly
Yes.
weren't prepared to provide school information because it's not really in our purview, but it is in your purview.
Mhm.
And vice versa, our information at
Yeah.
the school meeting.
Krista, the one thing I just would might add, I do think we want a handout, like you're saying, for the town and school meetings. For the budget committee public hearing, though, that's our meeting.
That's true.
And I do think I do think we probably should have a few summary slides there, which would
Mhm.
essentially just help you to talk through what's in the handout.
I agree.
To frame it, and then we can move into the individual budgets.
Great.
When do you finalize the town report?
As soon as you sign your paperwork and give it to us, basically.
Got
There is a date in the proposed schedule, so largely it's President's Day.
I wonder if we could, as the town reports come in, you know how you guys usually have an insert? I wonder if we could have a stack of our 1 sheets over there so that people grab it as they come to grab their town report.
It's finalized after your public hearing, so you could actually include your 1 sheet in the town report.
Let's do it.
Which would be even better.
That'd be crazy. So I got ahead of ourselves.
Mark, I just have a quick question. The consumer price index, right at the bottom, it says indices are available for US and various geographic areas. Was the CPI measured for New England? Are these figures for New England?
This is US. I don't know if you can get I mean, someone probably can calculate New England. This is just US. All these are US.
I guess the other question is New England's cost of doing business and cost of living higher than in other regions? Would these figures be slightly warped for us because we have extraordinary housing costs here in New England versus housing costs in Kentucky, where you can still get a house for 200 grand?
I think you can get them on a state level.
We can look into it. It's a good point. Certainly feels like construction costs here are higher, speaking from personal experience.
I know on our agricultural side, like for us to get grain here, for us to get fertilizer here is 50% higher than the Midwest. So and I also know that shipping, when we want to get hard goods, dry goods brought in on a flatbed, it's much more expensive to bring it to New England because there's no backhaul. The trucks have to come in one way full and then leave empty because we're not shipping anything out. So I would tend to think the cost of doing business in New England is higher than other parts of the country, and thus consumer goods will be more expensive.
Any other discussion points on this topic? Great. So then we would move on to the town budget update.
Okay, as a reminder, the town's on a calendar year basis, so the report you've seen is for the first 7 months of the year. On the revenue side, the main item is just timing, particularly the state pays a lot of its amounts to us even in December in some cases. And pilot payments are are just starting to come in. The real plus, I guess, at this point on revenues is that motor vehicle permits are running, I'd say, about 3% better than projected. And that's and that could be $40,000 or something. So about so overall, revenues look like they're coming in just a little bit better than projected. Any questions on that? On the expense side, the general fund, they're looking in line with the approved budgeted amounts. Debt service and interest are paid for the year, so don't get alarmed about that. The shimming and paving is down at the moment. That's going to really jump up in August and September. And welfare looks, vendor payments for welfare purposes looks low, but unfortunately, Neil tells me that's increasing to a fair amount. So at this point, overall, the expenditures, look like they're certainly in line or maybe a little bit lower than the budgeted amounts. Are there any questions on that?
I'm just wondering about the IT expenditure line item, because it seems like we've spent more than we anticipated.
We have. Yeah, we've had some unexpected replacements, which has come out of it. So that one is running very tight.
Ken, is the solid waste cleanup 4325, is that engineering and other studies related to the septic lagoon cleanup?
Yes, that's included in that. Look, the engineering for the lagoons are included in there.
And you expect those are gonna hit? That we're gonna spend that money?
Yes, I would. It will either be expended or encumbered,
Right, okay.
which is the same thing.
Yeah, got it.
And we do have encumbered funds from last year, which may be why this is one of the reasons this looks lower.
Can you, so full disclosure, I did actually try to self-educate myself on missed meetings from the select board and kind of failed in Google splunking around minutes. What has been decided, like what is the latest and greatest on the transfer station?
I was getting to other items.
Okay, wonderful.
I'll jump right to that.
Sorry,
As everybody knows, I'd say for a number of years, the select board has been grappling with what to do because Webster does not have green bags.
Mhm.
Even when we've asked them, they don't have any interest or think there's any chance that they would, their people would vote for green bags.
Can you speak up, Ken?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Pull the microphone up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess the biggest thing was maybe a month ago or maybe a little bit more. The select board had a meeting that was primarily focused on, what to do with the green bags. And we probably had 100 people either in the audience or on Zoom. And we ended up deciding on a couple of things. Because we were hearing that there were some people from Concord using our transfer station, we went to, you have to have a Hopkinton or Webster sticker to come in. And we noticed that and done some spot checks on that enforcement. As far as green bags, the thought was that the select board does not have the authority to do away with green bags. That would be a town meeting. But we're looking at two alternatives, either not enforce green bags, which most people were not adhering to anyway, or in effect, hire somebody or somehow to enforce it. The select board decided we're not going to enforce green bags. And at the next town meeting, they may be battling warrant articles to do away with green bags or to spend the money to enforce them. So we're not enforcing them. We, in conjunction with the Webster Board, we did look at all of the different fees, and those have been changed, they've been increased. And I think at our next meeting or meeting after that, we'll again be meeting with the Webster Board to fine tune some of those charges, because the staff was having some issues there. Did I miss anything, Neil?
No.
Any other questions on that?
Solar arrays, any progress on solar arrays?
Wait, can you, we
Uh,
got, before. can you-
Well,
all
I
this-
assume he's asking solar arrays at the transfer station.
Yes.
This, the entity that we're dealing with is paid for another year or of an option, because I think they were running into trouble with the interconnections.
Got it. Thank you.
Have you done a budget and tax implications of doing away with the green bags, or will that be done as part of any, that will be done as part of the warrant articles?
I would say there've been some more or less back of the envelope calculations on that also.
We have $45,000 revenue this year. So that would decrease next year because we're always using the money from the year before and then be eliminated the year after.
There's an interesting comment about the total cost of running that operation. I think that's about $800,000 in that time. And the 45,000 is kind of insignificant for all the grief that's being, generated on both sides of that. Remember, that was one of the comments at the meeting.
Is oh, sorry.
What was the revenue at its highest point from green bags?
We were up over 120. I think if it were enforced, and we'll have those numbers.
Yeah, I mean,
that would be
the number we should be
substantially more.
comparing it to, not 45. It's like you compare it to what we would get if we had a functioning green bag program versus no green bag program.
Plus the cost of the bags have gone up quite a bit.
And just for your edification, the strong majority of the individuals that were at the public meeting were to do away with green bags. I would say it was at least 90%.
Is there any conversation around any, like, I know at some point we had talked about stickers on bags or some kind of like, I don't know, literally any other options?
Yes, those were talked about, but
Yeah.
it still falls down to enforcement.
Right.
What's the, you said there's been some spot checking on the, I'm just curious.
Okay,
Like how much and what are we finding?
it was various select board members were the ones that were doing the spot checking. Say one Saturday morning, Sabrina and I went, and at that point, actually, most people had the stickers, and most were thankful we were doing this. Those that didn't have the stickers, because it was early in the process, we just told them, you're going to need a sticker in the future. But they had to show identification that they were the Hopkinton or Webster. Whereas I believe when Jeff Donahoe was doing some spot checking, he called the police a couple of times. But we agree that we have to do more spot checking or enforcement, and we have to get the Webster Select Board involved too, because they're also supportive of this approach.
Can I just have a question? I'm curious about this too. When I was there one day at the transfer station, we had to get up on the scale because we had some wood and it was like one piece.
That's some of the things that we're looking at that we have to fine tune. Want to hear what the staff, recommends.
Staff's recommending some corrections to some of those.
I'm still new, so I'm trying to understand all the pieces of this. In the revenue summary here, the 439,000 in the refuse charges under the landfill. What is the most significant driver of that? Is it like significant loads that people pay for like construction debris, or what is the revenue
Yeah.
driver at the landfill?
I'd say it's construction debris and that's where the payments from Webster would be.
Yeah, so we budgeted 100 out of there. Well, what we've received 89,000 from the town of Webster so far. We own 75% of the transfer station. They own 25%. We share revenue and expenses. So we pay all the expenses and then we're reimbursed for their 25% share after the revenue subtracted. So that so far this year is 89,000. Warner has paid 4,000.
Sorry, I'm looking at account 3404.
Right.
So
Yep.
you're saying of the 102, that's 89 from Webster?
3404. Should be 3404 is at 294 that we've received. 294,603.
24 is uncollected.
Am I looking at the right thing?
144 is year-to-date revenue.
Oh, I'm looking at the uncollected, sorry. It must be election week. So let me give you some better numbers. 60,000 or almost 61 has come from Webster. 59,500 is commercial. There's particularly, that's mostly one hauler in town that picks up trash. Those revenues have increased dramatically given that the new rate fee schedule went into effect August 1st. So we'll see that go up. Recycling revenue as of the end of July was about 24,000. And that's where you get the 144.
Got it.
I have a question.
But
Go
that's
ahead.
just ends up being a pass through essentially. Like the income from Webster is just offsetting a portion of the expenses. The whole thing is net 300,000 or 400,000.
That's
Nice.
correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then our share. Yes. There may be some advantage of running it as a separate fund, which would track it separately, but that would require a town meeting vote.
Interesting.
Because then you would really be able to more closely that and the ambulance, similar things. We're reimbursed. We charge a fee to both Warner and Webster for ambulance service. So we budget for the entire cost of the ambulance. And then on the revenue side, you receive the offsetting income.
Super helpful.
I have a question. I'm told that the hopper waste goes to Rochester, to the turnkey, and that's slated to close. Or do we, do we have a relationship or an idea of where the next folks are, where we're going to send our trash?
So we have a 5-year contract, which I think has one more year after this with Waste Management. So they have other options if turnkey. We actually got a very good deal because you've seen the ads, the out of state trash is coming in. They were trying to raise the percentage of in-state trash. So they gave us an excellent deal so that we reduce them. Helps us. I'm not sure how good it is overall. That's why we're paying $93, just over $93 a ton. And that's most towns are more in the 120 range. Wow. A lot.
One, okay, if anybody goes down to the Department of Public Works building, Dawn, you'll see that they're staging for the solar array by the by the lagoons is, the staging is going up
Check it
now.
every day.
Okay, but then you can report to me what's happening. Um, I believe at this point, the rough estimate for the lagoon cleanup is still in the $4 million range. And there's certainly the possibility, if we were to go that route, for some low interest loans and with some give back. That has to be worked out with Webster as well as town meeting.
Actually, we've been approved, I have to say, because I'm going to, one of the reasons we're receiving this grant is because of the position we added last year to do grant funding. So we are eligible to borrow from the DES Clean Water Fund the $4.1 million that we've estimated for that project, of which 401,000 will be forgiven. This is a low interest rate. I think it's 1% during construction, and then it kicks in and it's a low interest loan out. So that could be substantial savings. We have a meeting tomorrow with Nobis, our engineers, to really get better costs and timelines, and we'll be meeting in person to really go through that. So probably by both the next select board meeting and then the next budget committee, we'll be able to get that. We also received a $120,000 loan that we can get, of which 100 will be forgiven for further cameraing and work on our wastewater system, the pipes and all of that. So it was a good day when we received over $500,000 in grants. We were number 5 out of 60 something. So which is why we got money and most towns did not.
That's awesome. The 4 million is to the lagoon at the transfer station or the one at the sewer plant?
Transfer station.
Can you address the sewer?
Thought that was part of it.
The sludge removal
Correct.
is not part of that cost, but is part of that project.
So is it covered in the 4 million?
It is not.
Do we have a number of that?
We don't, but we should have that soon, now that we're getting the next, but that will be substantially less than it would have been had we had to ship this out. So we'll be taking the sludge from the wastewater treatment facility to and burying it basically at the transfer station in this sealed lagoon. It really is.
Mhm. Yeah.
That was looking like another 4 million originally.
Yeah.
Canada or someplace.
Yeah. Probably 1 million was we'd budgeted 200,000, which was what it costs prior to PFAS. Not that there wasn't PFAS there, but it wasn't being dealt with anywhere.
What is the annual cost of removing the sludge? You know, if you figure it out, I think, what do we scoop it out every 15 years or something like that?
Yeah, it's been 22, 23 years. So we had figured every 20 years at 200,000, so it was 10,000, but now it's probably 5 times that. So we're probably, right? Does that figure out right? So if it's $1 million over 20 years, it's basically the cost.
50,000 or 500?
50,000.
50,000.
But as part of the asset management work that's happening now, we'll have a better plan, and we'll probably be doing it more often at less, which will cost less.
If I recall, those sewer ponds don't have a concrete bottom. They have a rock bottom, correct?
I believe so. That's right.
So back when we made those ponds, I remember the conversation back in the 80s that we could have put a concrete bottom on them, and it would have drastically reduced our clean out costs, because each time we clean it out, the rocks come out with it, and then you have to replace the rocks again. So I guess my question is it in our long-term best interest to redesign those ponds? Because there is talk at the planning board level of ramping up the number of users that might be going into our sewer system. And as I understand it, that sewer system was designed so that we'd only have to clean it out about once every 20 years. But if we start putting more users on it, we're gonna have to start doing it, much more frequently.
Yeah, it's more because the regulations have changed and really because standard operating procedures have been updated. So it will need to be cleaned out more often. I don't know the answer to the rock and the concrete, but as part of this study and the whole asset management, we're looking at the whole system to try to have a clear plan in place.
Thank you.
I like that you remember the discussion from the eighties, Rich.
Well,
I remember watching Happy Days in the eighties.
well, it was very interesting because Hopkinton was being told by the state to do this because we were polluting the Kentucky River. But at the town meetings, people were saying, I don't want to pay this, I don't want to pay this. And it kept getting delayed and then we lost funding. So then Hopkinton had to cough up a whole bunch of money to do it ourselves. And we cheaped out. If we had lined it with a concrete bottom, then it would be much easier to clean out the sludge.
The other issue we deal with is the system was designed for 3 phases. Only 1 phase was ever built. So the number of users on that system is not really enough to maintain that system. That's part of our problem.
I was going to ask you about that. Is the sewer system paid? Does the sewer system pay for itself?
Operating, yes. All the other beyond that, no.
Okay.
But part of doing asset management and planning is to get it so it's at least a lot closer to self-funding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been an issue that the select board has looked at over the years. Should the sewer users be paying more of the capital costs?
Right.
Approximately how many users does it have?
There are, is it 250?
200 something.
Yeah, I think it's right around there.
It includes, say, the schools.
There's no allocation of those capital costs in what they're billed?
There's some, but as the costs have go up, the rates haven't been increased enough to keep up with it. We're increased substantially. One of the issues, back to the precinct, is the your sewer bill is based on the amount of water you use. And there's been so many issues with the precinct meters that I'm not sure where any of us are collecting the money we should be collecting. But that's being worked on.
So this school is not connected to it, though?
No.
Okay, just the Kentucky
Yeah, I
schools.
mean, just, yeah, the sort of immediate area of Kentucky Village.
So theoretically, the rest of us are subsidizing that sewer system, even if we don't
Yes.
live in that part of
And that's
town.
one of the things. But if we were to have the users pay the full capital costs, the rates would skyrocket, and well, probably the schools are among the biggest users there.
Uh-huh.
So we're just, they're not paying anyway. Then, and downtown,
Mm-hmm.
but it's $6 of one, $half in another, certainly by having the solar array at by the lagoons there,
Mm-hmm.
will reduce the operating expenses. And in my view, then you can increase the amount of capital costs being paid by the users.
Mm-hmm. So do you plan to bring a warrant article for the 4.1 million or whatever Nobis clarifies at this year's budget committee? Town meeting?
I wouldn't agree with Neil so quickly because Webster seemed to be balking at it. When we met with their select board.
No, I think they're on board and they don't vote on it. It will be our bond that they will help pay 25% of.
I vaguely recall a comment being made along some point of time that delaying dealing with this might be wise because every other municipality in the country is going to have to deal with this, the PFAS. And so at some point there may be federal funding really. I realize that's a lot of joined May's statements, but
That thought has certainly come up.
okay.
I think that's one reason we received the $400,000 is just because of that,
Mhm.
to have it move forward.
What happens if the town rejects it?
It depends how DES reacts. We know that it's there. We know there's an issue.
And they're telling the town this has to be remediated,
Yes.
but then the town says, sorry, we're not gonna issue the bond. Then what happens?
Down the road, they could take you to court. They could fine you. I believe they can take you to court, order it done,
Well, you,
and send you the bill. So, no, you.
Well, that's how the sewer system got.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because we were the last one on the Potomac River of towns to do this thing. And we finally got to the point where the Fed said, we're gonna take you to court. You're gonna pay one way or the other. And that's how.
People will have to decide. It will need a 3/5 vote anyways, so it will have to be a supermajority to move forward.
Why?
Because it's a loan.
It's a bond.
Feels tough. Do we know how many other towns are actually at this stage where they have been they've been identified and cited by DES for being out of compliance and on the
I
path
think
wrong?
timing wise, we're with a couple other towns at the front of the line because of the timing of our lagoon closing.
Do we know what are those other towns proceeding with cleanup?
I don't know for sure. I believe so.
Yeah.
But
This might be interesting to compare notes.
all of those things as we
Yeah.
move forward, and certainly before it's presented, we'll have.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions for Ken?
Just was wondering on update on the road maintenance and the road rebuilding projects for this summer.
For Briar Hill, apparently the money's going to go a lot farther than originally expected, because of the underfill is in better shape. And then I think DPW's been doing a lot of overlays all around town.
So we're working on Indian Ridge, if you've been down there.
Got into that
So
today.
And East Penco Road.
basically, that's going to get done all the way through and through the new Briar Hill intersection. Briar Hill, the intersection at East Pennacook, all the way to Culvert 4. We've put a lot of money into Briar Hill, starting here with Culvert 1 behind us. We did 4 culverts. It's been repaved at that 4th culvert. We'll get up to that new pavement.
That's great.
That still leaves
This
leaves
side.
less distance, but it leaves the hardest part because there's a lot more under drainage and things coming from Hopkinton Road in. But we've gotten substantially further than we thought we were going to be able to with the money. Both the DPW has worked hard as well as the contractor, which is really good. I'm trying to think where else is getting paved. All the paving should be happening within the next few weeks.
Courier was being paid this morning.
Career.
And how much does it cost per mile to do a major rebuild like we are on Briar Hill?
Let's see, $1 million a mile,
Million a month.
right?
Okay.
Because we figured $4 million for the 4 miles of Briar Hill. We've gotten further than that, so it's been a little less than that, but that's digging out and reboxing and putting in so that once it's done, it should be good. We're also have set aside, the final paving will happen not next year after the base coat has sat a year. And as you look at the hill, for example, you'll see what looks like storm drains in the road. There actually will be berms along the side paved berms that will put the water into there once the final paving gets done.
Putting that
So-
in perspective, back in 1960, when the interstate went through here, the cost per mile for the interstate was $1 million. Not counting the bridges, but just the 4 lanes. That's just mind blowing.
And when was that?
60s.
Well, Mark, and you're talking about the 80s, huh?
Yeah.
I was talking about the 60s. I didn't say nothing.
It's part of building that, that's 60 years old.
So
That's really cool, Don.
I'm not an engineer, so I'm not questioning the order of operations, but because of all of these intense weather systems that we have that really beat up Briar Hill Road, are we in danger of losing some of our progress by not having those paved ditches this year? You know what I mean? Like, is there a chance we're gonna ruin the new road because we don't have a place for the water to go?
I'm hesitant to answer. It should be fine. I'm hesitant to say, no, there's no issue with it. We're gonna get a big storm and then you're gonna see goings. No, they've planned it out. And you really want to let your base coat sit for a time and settle before you put the top coat on. So that's really important. But the all of the silt fences and all of that stay in place until it's done. Now, if we get a huge storm, which could happen, that may change, but
And when we put in culverts, we're sizing them bigger.
all the new culverts are much bigger. Everything that goes in is planning ahead. There will be Briar Hill will be closed at 846 Briar Hill, just in that area for replacement of 2 medium-sized culverts next week. So, so that we'll do, except for the drainage at this end, we'll do all the culverts on Briar Hill will be done.
Any other questions for Ken?
Just note that the initial department head budget presentation to the select board isn't until early November.
I think based on what you asked for last year, we're doing 1-sheet explanations for each department to go with each budget. You were looking for some more detail. So we've put those together and are continuing to put those together as we put the budgets together, sort of outlining some of the metrics as we look at when we're analyzing departments. And so hopefully that's helpful.
That's really great to hear. Thanks, Neil. Okay, wait, no. Yeah, so do you all have you all discussed a communications plan for the large warrant article that we're going to bring forward?
No.
Okay.
Too premature.
Okay.
I mean, I think we've talked about in general that it may be coming down, but that's all.
I remember at one point, a long time ago, I came to a select board meeting, made a suggestion that we take a cue from the town of Merrimack and how upfront they are with all of the trouble that they have with DES. They've got a big red button on their landing page that says PFAS updates, and you just click it and it's in chronological order with the most recent stuff at the top. Communication with DES PDFs, as well as anything else communication wise that they feel like the town needs to know. And I don't think it's because the town cares so much about the science. I think it's more about just being upfront about why this is costing so much money.
And I think I had said something at town meeting last year.
Yeah.
So if you go to the transfer station page and the lagoon page, every single document back and forth between DES and us, everything is there.
So I guess I would suggest
We'll
that
have a
we
lot more.
put a button on the landing page that would take somebody right there. Because $4.1 million is more than 50% of our annual budget. And I know we're not asking people to spend that in one lump sum, but I just feel as though, yes, we're being compelled to do that, but it's so much more compelling when you see it on DES stationery than when one of us is explaining it verbally.
Let us get through meeting with the engineers tomorrow. To
Okay.
know what we're really talking about. So
Yeah.
one of the reasons I think that happened that way in Merrimack was their drinking water was affected.
Mhm.
Right, so everyday residents in Merrimack were freaking worried.
Mhm.
And we don't have that. And so this, but we haven't made, I mean, I want to understand what's the budget implications if we're borrowing 4.1 million at 1% or whatever it is, and we'll get that soon enough. We don't have the drinking water thing, which is definitely activates people,
Mhm.
which is fortunate, I guess, but also makes it a little more abstract. right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But you know me, I don't like to hold on to information.
no.
I want to give information as freely and as openly and as often as we can.
Yeah, and we're not trying to hide anything, we're just.
No, I know.
There it is.
I know. But I mean, you know, you can put a button to that page now, even if it doesn't have that.
He wants the easy button, the easy PFAS button.
We would have a lot of buttons on the front page if that's how.
Right, but I mean, you know, we had a lot of conversation about a $2 million bond for Briar Hill Road, which we all drive on every day. This is so much more abstract and so much more money that I feel like communication is the only way that it's not going to definitely fail.
Still might.
Yeah.
I guess we need to have the information before we can share it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Anything else for Dawn? Or sorry, Ken. Looking, thinking Dawn, speaking Ken. All right, Dawn, Kentucky Village Precinct financial update.
Are you ready?
I've never been more ready.
I'll pass you off the hard copy. Let me get down through that first and I get you see at the top, there's 144,800 put in there. That was transferred over from the town after this report was done. So it's all skewed down here. The number 2 item, for $34,000 and change, that was a timber sale around the pond. That was a benefit this year. Of course, it's only happens once every 20 or 30 years, but that was a good one. On the second page, we're getting into a lot of expenses. We're finding out a whole lot of things are not up to date, are not appropriately working, et cetera, at the processing plant. So we're spending a lot of money. I'll get into that a little bit more, but the number 3 item there is the subcontractors, 95,000. We only had 110 forecasted for that. We're just getting into a lot of labor work.
Is that the Pennachuck water operator?
Yep. Good to remember.
I see their trucks.
Okay, number 4. Deals with the water treatment repairs and maintenance. Those are the actual items that they're putting in there. And again, it's at around 54,000. We only budgeted 20. So a lot of things are happening that we didn't know about, planned for when we made the budget. Going to the last page, number 4. To cover some of these expenses, we had to take $200,000 out of the capital reserve to cover these expenses. And it's a little bit of misunderstanding, but trying to understand how we can use that money. I think from what I've heard through the years, we can't use it for general operating, can't use it for wages and salaries and tax and other audit type things. We have to use it for literally putting material, new stuff into the plant, which is what they're doing. So to get out of the bottom line, the net income is a minus 147,000. But when you add in the 144 that came in, that basically balances that out. So that's sort of where we are financially.
Dawn, what was the 144?
That was the
You said it came from the town. Was that from?
the local taxes. The money is raised by taxes, but the check has to be written by the town back to the citizen.
We pay twice a year.
It's just like the school.
The school monthly, the precincts twice a year, county once a year.
That makes sense?
Yep.
Okay, that's the easy part. The precinct is dealing with a lot of issues. Basically, coming to the front since Steve Clow was there many years ago. And he left the precinct, and he was a one-man show, did basically everything. And
Everything regarding maintenance and repairs.
maintenance, repairs, planning, budgeting, the whole thing, it's a one-man show, the precinct commissioners were basically sort of in the background, and he did the whole thing. He was a very, very dynamic person. But a lot of things in hindsight may not have been done when they should have been done, and we're trying to catch up with that. This has been going on now for 3 or 4 years, and it's going to go on at least for another 15. So there's a lot of repairs that need to be done, and it's very costly. I'm going to go down through a bunch of things here. They're continuing to deal with the assessing of the status of the system, the whole entity of this thing. The current upgrades that needs to meet the current standards that the state has. And then looking at the long-term needs for the next 12 years. We've been talking now for 10 years about the major plant up there has to be redone. And a few years ago, that was 3 or 4 million. It's probably maybe double that now. And that'll happen. Hopefully not a lifetime. Currently, the certified contract operator, Penachuk, is working through a lengthy list. And when they came in a year ago, they put up probably 50 or 60 items that they've identified. They're very thorough, they're very good. They have many other towns they deal with. And they're working their way through that list. It's upgrades, it's computer upgrades. Most of the equipment that's in that treatment plant, it can't be replaced. It has to be new. When you do a new system, everything has to be done. Computer systems, all controls, et cetera, have to be done. So every time they find one thing wrong, it's like dealing with an old house. The sill goes and you gotta replace the whole floor. And we're finding that, up there today. To date, about $200,000 has been spent, and we saw that on the numbers we looked at the sheet. Well, the related upgrades. So the 200,000 is going to be done very quickly, and we're probably going to have, in my opinion, we're going to have to probably get back and revisit taking some more money out of that, because right now we're pretty much maxed out.
And is that 200,000 for the last 12 months or
6 months.
6?
Because we're really putting together, a lot of effort to get it up to speed. To cover the expected costs that's going to happen in the next few years, and that number may be $6, $7, $8 million in the next 10 years. So that's huge. And right now, our water rates are way lower than they should be. And part of this extensive study is to come up with a comprehensive water rate study. And that was completed in June. I've read it twice, and it's very complicated as to how the different options are to do it. Whether you charge a huge amount to each customer that's just hooked up, and we have 600 and some customers. You really lay in heavy on how much the water usage is. That's another way of doing it. Or do you borrow it and bond it and just pay it through the taxes? Or do you just do it all through taxes? So the commissioners are working their way through what's the best way to do that. But whichever way it is, it's going to be a significant increase each year for the next probably 10 years. And that's we got a lot of millions that we probably don't have to cover. We probably won't be able to do it all because the tax rate just won't accept it. We've got roads, we've got the PFAS, we've got precinct that only affects 600 and some customers, but it's still significant.
Don, who did the rate study?
The rate studies were done by a private contractor. I have the name of it, research it up. It was a subcontract as part of this whole grant that the federal government gave us. They gave us $200,000 grant to do part of the study, and then we've got other things for finding out if we have another ability to get rid of the pond, in essence, and do it through groundwater. That's a whole other study that's being done also. So there's a lot of moving parts going on right now. And in the next year or so, we'll have a lot more information as to what the future looks like. The current goal is to upgrade the existing boundary facility to continue to meet the state standards, for the next 10 years until this thing is really understood and how we're going to solve the long range problems. But the precinct commissioners think that if we put in maybe $1 million into that plant. It will get us through the next 10 years, and then there will be the big hit. And hopefully through all these increased rates that we'll have the money to do a significant product. So getting it to $2 million, we've got to set aside in the capital reserve. That's going to be used one way or the other pretty soon. The state requirements, in addition to all of that, the state, of course, is, along with everybody else in the country, is trying to identify how many lead pipes we've got serving all the people in the country. So that is an ongoing thing, and they haven't really figured out how that's supposed to be done. If you can imagine, for 600 and some customers just in Kentucky Village precinct, the acid test of that is to dig up every single one of those services to every single one of those users at where the street service stops and the private person's responsibility going to the house. The precinct's only responsible for the precinct portion of that. But if you really do it 100%, you got to dig up every 600 holes, 600 plus holes, and figure out whether you got proper lead, and then fix it if you've got the lead. So it's a whole nother thing that's facing it, and we don't have a cost to that, but it's going to, in some fashion, it's going to hit. The other ongoing thing is the state is narrowing down the disinfection byproducts that happen when all systems use chlorine to treat the organic material that's in the pond water, the leaves, the fish poop, I guess, use it. But all those things that are coming down the pipe that have to be chlorinated, when you put chlorine to organic material, you get a byproduct that now is a problem. And I saw, like, my weird mind think it's sort of like PFAS. And PFAS is everywhere. You process it, you put it back in the river, it's still with us. And this disinfection byproduct, it's not hurting anybody. The drinking water is still as good as it's ever been, but it's an issue that has to be addressed. And there's 5 or 6 towns around that are trying to do this. They do it through radiation, they do it through aeration, and we're trying to figure out what's the best way to do that. But that's a whole other issue. Moving on. We've had a lot of personnel changes in the precinct organization. We have 3 commissioners, 2 are still there. The third one is probably going to be changed. He's basically moving to North Carolina. Ron Muskremsky, who has a business here in town. And he hasn't been really involved very much at all for the last 6 months, 9 months. So that's put another burden on the 2 that are still there. And we need to get that person probably replaced in the future. We had our treasurer and our clerk both resigned together last month for family issues, whatever those were. And Kathy Donna, who has been the real solid person, knowing all the information and doing all the day-to-day stuff with the bookkeeping, she's asked to resign. And that is basically in process, tonight. In fact, we have a new person who's going to do that, Jen Mock, who comes from a great heritage of being really, really good. So I expect that's going to end up being smooth. Lastly, there was a notice sent out along with the bill for the first half of the year that basically said we're not going to bill the second half of the year. So as a commissioner, they got together and said, because they've got so much confusion of kind of remeters and all that, they decided, well, we'll just skip the bill and we'll do it beyond. And they admit they got to cut up a brain cramp. We'll use that word instead. And because, how are you going to pay for bills if you don't bill? So Division of Revenue get a little excited over that, and there will be another bill. And go back to your statement a little while ago, the sewer bills generated from the water meter bills. And so we got to go around and read all the meters again. And that's kind of manual process. They drive around and literally take the meter readings. But another issue is our meters are beyond the point of reclaiming, so those are all gonna be changed. That's another $300,000 or $400,000 that is gonna be spent sometime in the next couple of years. So we are in a lot of turmoil and a lot of expenses, and it's gonna be very interesting.
Sorry, Don, real quickly. So the meters can't be read.
They can be read, but they're basically inaccurate. Some of them haven't been read for a while, and they're just averaging whatever it is. But you literally drive around the car and you're like, big
Okay.
phone in your hand. It gets into the meter that's in the house. Rather than, it used to be, you have to go in the house to do it. Now we've advanced to that point, but it's gonna be, the meters can't be maintained and they can't be replaced. They're just out of date. So those need to be replaced also.
Has there been discussion of just using an average number based on occupants in the house or something like that?
We don't do that like the village. We literally, it's kind of unique. But but it's because it's such a variation of how people use the water. You're basically really fixture, not a fixture charge, a connect charge, and then you have usage charge. And then that covers part of the cost of it, and then it's taxed based on your property value. Does that answer your question?
It does. It's just hard to justify the 400,000. So if people would tolerate an average of some kind, and
Well, there's just no way of averaging.
maybe there's a multiplier if you have a
People have-
13-year-old girl in your household.
So that's just,
Sorry.
but
My own experience.
some people have, they stuck toilets and they run up a huge amount of bills. Some people have, 4 kids in the family and they flush the toilet a lot and they take a lot of showers. Well, daughters take a lot of showers, guys. But it's such a variation. So it's always been the state, the state of mind that we want to measure as one of the factors. And again, the sewer lives off the usage also. So. But there's a lot of moving parts going on there. It's going to be very interesting to be part of that solution.
So you found a new treasurer?
Pardon?
You've identified a new treasurer? Oh,
And it doesn't take much time to do that. They just have to, it's a state requirement that you need someone.
absolutely.
It used to be done by Kathy Donovan, but we got reprimanded by that. It's the same thing. The town has to have that separation of writing the checks, the treasurer.
Mhm.
Do you want the information of the woman who's the treasurer of the Hopkinton Village Precinct? She lives in,
They still elect their treasurers, so. it
oh,
has
they
to be
elect
a-
them.
So it has to be a resident of the precinct.
Oh, yeah, she lives in Henniker, I think, the one that we use.
Like,
What?
you pay her.
Yeah, we pay her. She's got a line item, accounting fees.
Like you who don't live in the precinct.
No, I can't.
Any questions?
I'm actually curious, Don. I mean, well, for one, I think what you're dealing with the water system is what municipal water precincts all over the place are dealing with, which was decades of not properly pricing water. Right,
Well,
so
absolutely.
you're not alone, right?
That's-
It's what water systems are dealing with.
And again, we're fortunate, we haven't had major breaks in the mains. And they're old, some of them have been drilled out. And, made almost like new, but it's just the beginning of
Yeah,
the funding.
so it's great that you're doing this comprehensive look, even though it's gonna be painful.
Yep.
This is a kind of an ignorant question, but it's more of like a governance question. And when I lived in the Hopkinton Village Precinct, and paid our special assessments once in a while for things that irritated me. I often wondered, like, why do we still have a village precinct? Like, is it really worth it? I understood why they were established initially, but here in this day and age, it is hard to sustain from a governance standpoint. And it has struck me as very inefficient in a small town. And that there would be some efficiencies in terms of governance, staffing, expenditures, if we,
You are right on cue.
and I'm just curious, like,
I
has
wasn't gonna
has
get
that
into
conversation
Yeah.
happened in Hopkinton over the years at times or not? And because I mean, I don't live in Kentucky Village, but I feel like the health and vitality of Kentucky Village is really critical to Hopkinton. As somebody who lives here and goes to the village.
Again, that's a very astute observation, because that I have heard that whisper of a conversation by one of the commissioners. Which probably shouldn't get into that, but you know, that's something that needs to be looked at. Because when the state came in and did an evaluation of what the manpower should be for Hopkinton, specifically the precinct, we had one person doing all of that, Steve Cloud, and they said you should have 4 people do it. And we hired a straight hire to do the sewer part of it. We had a person doing the water side, but he left to go somewhere else. Now we've had to hire a contractor, and that doesn't get the whole job done. Doesn't answer the phone, doesn't do all the day-to-day stuff that needs to be done. In my personal opinion, not talking from the precinct commissions, we need a person to do that, to get that kind of coverage. And maybe it's not full-time, but sure, the Pennachuck people don't want to answer the phone and deal with the general public. So we're still missing that person, and that burden all falls on 2 volunteer or 3 volunteer commissioners, and they all have their own lives and doing their own thing. It's unreasonable to think that they would do that part. So,
Yeah, I wonder if the model still works.
pardon?
I said, I don't know that the model
No, I
still
agree.
works anymore.
I think you're right on target. All right, I'm sure Neil hasn't even been approached to help yet. Or maybe you have.
This is probably not a good place to comment on that.
Sure.
But I think I think you said that the precinct commissioners had a discussion. So I'm aware of that discussion.
I think that's the way you have to go. It's just too much going on with state regulations. And the whole system always gets more sophisticated. And again, they're volunteers, they don't get paid to do this. That's not their life. Any other questions?
I have a question about the capacity of the system. How much more is it the lake? How much more can the lake supply in terms of if we wanted to expand the system? How much more can the plant put out, the current plant that we have? How much more customers could be put on theoretically? And how much could like the pipes that we have in the ground deliver more volume?
I think the lake has got much more capacity. We've never not overflowed the lake. The capacity is the issue, getting it down to the processing plant, boundary down to that. And that's got to be, enlarged if we have significant, and also the whole distribution system, coming down into the different village needs help. So it gets piping, and that's a huge expense. And they've talked about going across exit 6 to get over there to Travis other stuff with this development, whatever that would be another, draw on the system, if you will. But there's more capacity there. But it's the infrastructure that would be.
Do you know how much more capacity we could add right now? Like how many more, we have 600 on the system now. How many more theoretically homes could we add right now?
Right now, probably not much, because, and again, I'm talking without any real numbers. But you could add more. The fair is, before we redid the Kimball spot on Main Street, on the other side, until we get the water coming down from Fair Pond, you got the reservoir.
Yeah,
the side of the hill.
storage tank.
Before that was upgraded, each summer we went into water restrictions. And now that system online, we solved that problem. So that increased the capacity for, and the fair always was a moving target, because they use so much water during that particular time. That's normally the driest time of the year. So that was another reason why we had to go with water restrictions. But that, again, that has been nullified because of that. But I don't know the answers to that. They have, and I could get you the capacities that we normally run at, so I think it's around 200,000 gallons a day. Capacity is, above 400,000. So, but it's right now, we're trying to just make sure that the processing and the chlorination and all of that is up to speed to do what it should be doing.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments for Dawn? All right. Vicky, over to you.
Okay, yeah. So high level, based on Mark's comments, I find there's a difference, and correct me if I'm wrong, Neil, Don, I find there's a difference, and that the burden that the Katuka Village Commissioners carry is exponentially larger than the Hopkinton Village Commissioners carry for two reasons. In Hopkinton, the water district is different than the precinct, right? I have a well, but I live in the precinct. So dealing with the water operator and DES falls to a subgroup. It's not all on the commissioners. In fact, they don't deal with it. They have a board, a water board. It's a separate group. And then also I am to understand that we, the Hopkinton Village Commissioners, have held on to our zoning ordinance with a vice-like grip, whereas Kentucky handed over their zoning to the town.
I don't think they ever had.
Never had.
Oh, you never had it? Okay, great. So there,
That was basically the origin of Hopkinton Village.
exactly, it's the zoning ordinance, exactly. So we often have high level conversations and always come to the same conclusion, which is that we want to keep it.
Not in my backyard.
Yeah,
We would have a special overlay for the Hopkinton precinct and still not have to have a Hopkinton Village precinct manage it.
absolutely. We just don't trust the town that they will maintain the idyllic, terminally quaint downtown area. That we have a more vested interest in it than the 6,000 people who live here. The overlay district could be rewritten.
And that resistance does not exist within the Kentuka precinct to like eradicating it.
Hopkinton, as I understand, you probably explained that a little bit. It is its own entity set right in Hopkinton as a total town that is sanctioned by the state, and they have their own rules, everything.
I don't know. I can't speak to that.
So a precinct, and both precincts are like, they're sort of like mini towns within the town, and they have their own government, they have their taxing authority, they have their annual meetings, they follow all the same. I think the town of Hopkinton was slow, or I should say slower than the village of Hopkinton in putting zoning in place. So there was actually zoning in Hopkinton Village prior to there being town zoning, and that is still in place.
But it's a unique situation, as I understand, within the state, that they're like a whole sanctioned separate entity.
So there's 5. We've been doing a little research on this because they want to update the zoning. Okay, and if you read it, you would understand why. There's 4 pages about not putting a cell phone tower in the center of Hopkinton. I don't think anyone's trying to do that, but I guess it was a big deal the last time they revisited this. But there are 5 precincts within townships in Hopkinton, in New Hampshire, that have their own zoning ordinances. So it's like Conway, us, and 3 other villages. But it's such smaller potatoes on this side of town than what you all have to manage. Also, because there's no sewer, it's only a water system. And we were compelled to upgrade the water system, right? And just did it. And that's our letter that Mr. Houston was yelling at me about when I came in, was that we got sanctioned by the state for overspending on the water system. So this is a good segue. Or take one pass.
It's like a badge of honor.
It's the 3rd year in a row because they didn't sanction from what DRA said. So.
Yeah, and it's because it took 3 years to do this water system upgrade. And as we always talk about, every estimated cost ends up being more, right, than originally estimated. So we budget based on estimates and then overspend. So it's the last page.
Precincts have to follow the same rules towns do. It's the same thing as if we over expended our bottom.
This is the most beautiful written rap on the knuckles.
This is what I was talking about. You're in trouble.
Yeah, we got in trouble for overspending by $5,100. And that was water system operator bills is the, ours isn't called Penachuk, ours is called the Aquaman, I think, but that's what we overspent on.
CC Hopkinton Budget Committee, thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Absolutely, and Neil put it on the PDFs too. So there's not a lot to report on these actual financial statements. So I put the budget in as page 3 so that as we move forward and I keep giving you financial statements, you can reference back to the budget if you want to. But I don't actually have any news about what's going on with the budget at this point.
Any questions for Vicky? Thank you for the update, Vicky.
Sure.
Hearing no questions, we would move to Rob, but he is not here. He did provide an email summary that I think it would be appropriate for me to read more or less and summarize. Unless somebody tells me that would not be appropriate.
Is this what was in the packet? Or what's on our?
Oh, is
on
it
the,
there?
Right, yeah, 2-page thing.
Can't believe he's not dialing in from his remote campsite.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah, where's the commitment?
There's already. You already have it. So it is in the package called School Budget Committee Notes. Does anyone want me to read it loud or can everyone?
I think we've had time to look at it.
Okay,
It is posted in the public documents too, if any of the public
okay.
wants to see it.
I would note 2 things on his note. One, it looks like there is additional expenses that were predicted but not incurred, of which 40% were special education services, 20% transportation related, and 20% for final facilities expenditures, and 20% for unexpected other costs. And so that resulted in not having to draw down Article X, I believe, which is good. And the other thing of note you will see in his section B, comparative metrics. So this we had talked about under our previous discussion topic. So I don't want to reopen it very much, but I feel compelled to note that Rob did calculate the percent of FY 24 and 25 budget that is approximately budgeted under salaries and benefits. The reason he wanted to call that out is because it is that percentage which he and I think the board believe are most fairly compared to the indices. Where outside of that percentage, you have more of those I don't want to call them external, unpredictable and or aren't captured by an index costs like special education. So that's just in context of the discussion we had earlier.
Can someone remind me the basics of Article 10? Is it that we're allowed to hold in the bank up to 10% of the town's valuation? Is that right? What is the 10?
The 10 was the Warren article number when it was.
Okay, so how do they calculate how
Nobody
much we're allowed?
calls it Article 10. It's really just fund balance, but they
Okay,
refer to it as Article 10.
and what is the limit that we're allowed to carry?
That they do. School has a different limit.
Okay,
than town because the town has to pay the school whether we collect money or not. That just went up a couple years ago, so I don't know.
so it's,
There is
it's a
set
formula.
percentage.
Isn't the town like 5% of the
No, the town doesn't have a limit.
town doesn't?
No.
Sort of a guideline.
You're not right, but I think 2.5 was the original one, and they moved it up to 5.
5, that sounds right.
That's the guidance, not statutory.
For the school, it's a statutory limit.
Okay.
'Cause
So when they say we
schools-
fully funded Article 10, that means they've put it up to the max.
It's only within the last 10 years that schools could have a fund balance because they didn't, I don't want to say we didn't need one, but it's not like the town where we collect money and have to pay it out to the other entities. So towns could always have a fund balance and that really has to have a fund balance.
Any other comments on the school budget or notes? Obviously Rob is not here to answer them, but I'm sure that we could take them down and pass them along if we had them. Okay. All right, next up is budget committee meeting schedule.
So I did a proposed schedule based on
Okay,
what has happened through years.
is this the first year you did this, Neil? Because I don't remember seeing this.
No, I have this, I have this
Yeah.
from last year.
You do? Okay.
Mhm.
Maybe I was,
Quite a few years.
the only adjustment, somebody remind me, or not adjustment, but the only question I have. I recall the school coming to us before Christmas in past years with like or maybe it was just Norm speaking for the school board, but with some sort of like, hey, here's the direction we're trending to avoid any surprises. It wasn't like firm, but it was like, this is the universe of numbers we're looking at and any major impacting things.
You do generally have a meeting in November.
Right.
Which is before the town presents in December, and Norm may have done an update too in December, just where they were at.
Does that ring a bell for other
I
folks?
remember the
Yeah,
superintendent sitting and saying, we will get this to you soon.
yeah.
Seemed like it was a month sooner.
And they did in the past 2 years get it to us sooner. So I know that Rob's not here, but maybe that's something I can take back to him on email maybe, and it doesn't have to be like a formal presentation, because that's not what they did before. It wasn't super formal, but it was like,
So we always have to last.
Or if their
the
schedule,
past 2 years.
if you want to add things from their schedule, that certainly can get updated.
Mm.
You know, I think it's helpful to have, I feel like, yeah, the superintendent came in And just, yeah, have that high level conversation with us about what was the guidance they were giving to
Yeah,
either what they were getting from or giving to building heads. And I thought that was helpful, and it was probably October or November.
yeah.
Would be a nice invitation to see if they would develop themselves.
I guess that would, I think, be the request then, is if maybe they could do a sort of informal guidance presentation in November of what they're tracking to with their department heads.
Or even what their major,
Course drivers.
Right.
yeah, what their major drivers are that they anticipate, yeah. Because they should know.
Specialized transportation. Contracts.
This is good to refresh us as we kind of really head into the heart of the season.
And Neil, because Rob is not here to say, okay, I'll take that back to the school board or to Mike. Can I just like email him after this and tell
Oh,
him we
shoot.
talked about it?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is just
Yeah.
a first draft, so.
Okay, cool. Any other adjustments or anything that jumps out of people? Okay. All right, hearing none.
You
Oh,
want to
whoop.
set the public hearing date? This says TBD. Is it a TBD?
Yeah, I'm waiting for a little more information on some other scheduling conflicts, so. It generally is either,
Not a lot of there's not a lot of options.
right, it's really 2 Wednesdays, so.
I personally feel fine holding on that a month or two. But
Yeah.
okay. Anything else? All right, I will open it to public comment.
You can close it now.
All right. Hearing none, I will close public comment. Is there any other business before the committee?
When's our next meeting? Is it the November one?
Yes, unless well, no. I do think. I guess that's the question. Typically we do meet in October. I recall meeting October, November, December. I think. Let's keep the October meeting on the books. For the second Wednesday. That would be October 9th. And depending, that way we can give the school kind of 2 options, and if not, then it'll be a quick meeting. Also, maybe it's an opportunity, we'll have refreshed the spreadsheet as previously discussed, so maybe we could share that.
And maybe we can talk a little bit more about the one sheet that we're going to work on, whether or not there's anything we want to be sure and have.
That's a good
That's
idea.
not, already on the template.
Yeah,
I didn't hear this, sorry.
Can you hand those down?
Oh, I just said we could talk at the October meeting. If we don't have a lot on the agenda, we can just firm up exactly what we want on our one sheet that you.
Yeah.
do you have an electronic
What is
copy of that?
this?
Oh, I'm sure. I
Okay,
Nice.
all right, okay, so
This is the other business, if that's okay.
the floor is yours.
Okay, so I just wanted to talk briefly about what's going on at the planning board that might have budgetary influences in the future. So the map that you're looking at is a map of Kentucky Village. And you can see the river right there and the road crossing right there. That would be the fire station. And then you can see kind of up the center is Park Avenue. And then Kearsarge Street kind of goes in the middle, and then Spring Street on the left. And you can see the planning board has the areas blocked off as area 1 in blue, and then area 2 in red, and area 3. So what those are is those are the water lines. Those dotted portions of the street are the water lines. And as you recall, last year, the planning board was talking about going into the industrial zones and maybe putting in some like large amounts of housing. That kind of got blown up, well, sorry, not blown, voted down because people didn't want it. But a major reason that it really couldn't happen very easily is because there's no water service in that part of town. So this year they were looking at, can we put multifamily housing in Kentucky Village on the existing water system? And the sewer system also goes part way. In the R1 zone, it's allowed to have up to 12 houses now
2 houses per what? Per
per
lot?
lot.
Per lot.
But
Regardless of lot size?
so I only have a couple of these, but I can hand them down. This, maybe Neil can run a couple more of these off. The problem is that the lots are too small with the current zoning in R1. So the planning board in July and August, well, they first talked about it in July, and then I went to the August meeting. They're talking about changing the zoning possibly in the R1 to make it more friendly for developers to come in and perhaps buy those lots and convert them into instead of single family home, maybe quadruplexes or 8 oplexes or 12 oplexes. It all depends on what the new zoning would end up being looking like. So this kind of dovetails with Dawn's presentation that the water is expensive to provide that service. Yes, that we have a water system there. Can we add a lot to it? I kind of got the feeling that from the planning board meeting that the costs of doing these kinds of developments is going to be higher than they're anticipating. And of course, with the community want single family homes to be bought up by developers. So this is just a study concept. They are not going to vote on this year, they said, but perhaps next year. So let me just finish and then you can say, what would the impact of the schools be from having multifamily housing? What would the impact of the water system have on a rising of the population using that system? What would the financial impact of the sewer system be? Asking these questions, I didn't get any real good answers. But again, it's preliminary. It's just a study. I would not hold them down to any numbers, but I would hate to have something like this go to the town for a vote without having some sort of handle on those numbers. That's it.
This is a moving the digest, wonder, as we talk about doing these kinds of activities, when builders are allowed to come in and do these kinds of things, who ends up, I mean, that's in the planning, but eventually it's going to come to the budget committee because there's going to be a rise in water, there's going to be a rise in school needs and sewer. And I'm wondering if any discussion has been that builders need to cover some responsibility of what they're bringing in and the impact that that's going to have on communities, whether it's fees or whatever, because this is ultimately going to fall on the homeowners, the taxpayers in the town. It isn't just build this unit, bring the people in, then you have the expenses that go with it. And I just think there needs to be long-term studies within this.
You're talking about impact fees.
Yes.
Doesn't the planning board have those in the zoning ordinances at this point? No?
No, because of the amount of development so far, it's just not worth doing for the most part. I can give an update on the housing though, where the housing committee is at, because I think this ties in. Because statewide, nationwide, there's a housing issue. But I think make sure you don't put the cart before the horse. So the housing committee has received a grant for phase 2 and 3 of it's called a HOP grant, not Hopkinton, but housing. I can't remember what it means. So the housing committee has contracted with a consultant that will begin looking at some of this. And a big part of that is really community outreach and really getting a sense of what the community wants, because that's got to be your first thing. You've got to know what the community wants and doesn't want. That's really important. And then the next steps are looking at, okay, if this is what they want, where does that go? And does the infrastructure support that, and puts all that together? So that consultant work will go from now really until March, April. And then there's time through to look at potential zoning changes and what that would mean. And then you've got basically a year before that would be voted on. So probably the soonest anything coming out of the housing committee would be voted on would be March of 2026. And there's a lot that would need to happen. And I don't think anyone can guess what will come out of the community engagement process as to what people want. So I would encourage you to take part in all of those. And I think they'll do a good job keeping people updated as they work through that. Who knows where they'll end up? I think, and we'll see. I think the planning board's going to end up holding off and waiting for all that to happen. But because I think it's really important that it meets the needs and wants of the community, and is affordable, and there's so many things involved that it's really important, so that people aren't going to pass something they don't know all the answers to all those questions. So that's really important. If anything is proposed, maybe nothing will be proposed.
The sheet on the dimensions of changing zoning, I discussed it with a couple members of the planning board after the meeting, and these numbers are not going to be the final numbers. They realize that bringing Fountain Square Kentucky zoning out into the R1 is really city zoning. Old Kentucky Village, Fountain Square, built by the old timers before we had zoning, would be what we might perhaps call city zoning right now, because really tiny frontages. Those old timers put the houses close together, and spreading Kentucky Village, the R1 out into R1 would probably not be appropriate. So they're trying to come up with some kind of middle ground on frontage and setback from the road, building structures in from the sides, how much clearances you need.
Sorry, Rich, can you, maybe I'm just not a maps person, but like within R1, which lots are we like, again, I understand nothing has been decided, but like, what are the things that have been discussed? Like, what numbers am I looking at? Like 61, 34?
Where you, these are lots.
Yeah. So I thought that the idea was that you break up the lot, or is it like within a lot? You tear down a single family home, or you make it a quadruple, or
again, we're just talking about conceptually here.
yes.
Theoretically, a developer would come in and buy like one of these larger lots, tear down the house and put in 8, 10, 12 units on that lot. Or the homeowner might keep their single family home, and then out back, they might put like a quadruplex and kind of like subdivide their own lot.
Which ones are you pointing to? I know totally hypothetically, but when you say larger lot, what's like a number you're looking at?
Okay, like right above the number 2, the big red 2.
Like 128,
128,
129.
See how those lots are a little bit bigger? And the red, see the red?
No, I know, but where?
Pine Street.
Where's that tree?
Is that Pine Street?
Is that them tree?
Fire, there's the river fire station.
Or maybe it's no, it's not
No.
Pine Street. It's what do you call that street that heads off of Kearsarge? Across from the school. Just before you get to the school.
Is this the school?
This is spring.
I thought-
School is over here.
Yeah.
So
You'll see the bigger.
Is the school?
Right
there?
It's up in
Yeah.
Pinewood Drive.
school is 67.2
Yes.
and
Well,
maybe
it's-
one also in school, and then there is 61.
So
Oh. Wait, then
I-
where's Pine Street?
I guess my main concern looking forward is, taking the 30,000 foot level
Well, I was
do we want urban zoning in Kentucky Village? Do we want city zoning in Kentucky Village?
Well, sounds like that's what the public engagement process is for, is to talk about that. I mean. And you're suggesting there's a budget committee angle on it, which is what are the financial implications of some of these choices.
Absolutely.
And so it's good to surface it, and maybe when there's actually a real proposal on the table. Those are questions we can make sure get put forward.
And the planning board meets next Tuesday.
But were you saying that like there's some decision going to be made next Tuesday? But what I hear you saying is there's about 6 months of public engagement that's about to start.
Certainly the housing committee consultant is starting. It's working from now until March, so yeah, there's a good 6 months, if not more.
So there's not going to be any kind of like
Of engagement.
decisions by the
I don't-
planning board.
I don't
they're proposing.
I think
to-
the planning board's moving forward with that. It's what the last that I heard, but
Okay.
I'm done. Unless you-
We
Thanks,
did
Rich.
talk about, sorry,
No, go for it.
just, yeah. There's a mention of impact fees. And I remember during our budget process last year, that was a conversation about revisiting. Because there've been, maybe there's been an uptick in, we'll say, residential development, or there had been for a few years, right? And I think there's curiosity in this committee about whether we should be charging impact fees. As a,
we researched that and I provided in the select board discussed that
Can you update
I
at
at that
remember
time, and I would have to pull out the research, but we did, we looked at what's involved and what it means and provided.
I thought where it was left was you had suggested the administrative fees of going to that kind of an approach would make it not really worthwhile based on the development.
That's my recollection with the amount of
But
development that we
if
have,
things,
but
if there is a lot of development, yes, we certainly, I think, should be looking at impact fees.
It strikes me that math might be very different if you're talking about like 3 residential new build, single family homes versus like 4
Condo
12 unit.
buildings.
Yeah.
Back in the day when the planning, put together the master plan, the first one. I know there was a heavy discussion on impact fees there, because we were talking about putting a limit of 60 new starts every year. So I don't know where that got dropped off, but it's, what you say, it's been dropped off out of the.
I don't think there were any new homes in my first 10 years here, so that's how I think that's why.
Right, no, after we
They-
got by that, they were lined up out here at 8 o'clock at night, waiting
Yeah.
to get in here the next morning, and get their one of 60 permits. And
Growth
then the
permit.
next year, it was squat, it was 3 or 4.
Yeah,
the developers ran when they heard you came to town, Neil.
yeah, I know it was before us and then it stopped.
That was scary time back then, when we were
Yeah.
fearful.
Yeah, but I mean, Deb, you raised the question about like impact fees, I think, and so that's probably something that needs to be in the mix, and I assume would be in the mix if there's any proposed significant zoning changes that would accommodate, an increase in multifamily development, like that should be in the part of the conversation at least.
Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention is that they're also looking at the other side of the river. So this is I guess you'd say the northern side of the river, but on the other side of Kentucky Village, like up Maple Street, out Main Street, would be the next areas that they would be looking at under the same concepts. Up towards the Kentucky Village Cemetery and up Kennecook Road, following the water lines all over town.
All right. Any other questions or business before the committee? May I ask someone to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor of adjourning for the evening? Aye. Great.
So my water.
You fixed yours?
Isn't that wild?
You want to make those changes? You want me to make those changes?
I'll sign myself up. That's how to do it. I'll sign myself up. Great. And I will, I'll send them to you so that you can like double check it. Sure. Sound good?
Yeah.
Second set eyes.
Full eyes, yeah, full eyes.
Yeah.
You know, Mr.
Okay,
Keith,
perfect.
you fill up a reservoir for the cows.
No worries.